From the expansive windows of her minimalist downtown Austin condo, Eleanor Vance, Ellie to the very few people who truly knew her, watched the Texas sunset paint the sky in fiery hues of orange and violet. Below, the city hummed with the vibrant energy of tech startups and booming real estate, a world away from the stifling, emotionally charged atmosphere of the Vance family home she'd escaped years ago. At 38, Ellie had cultivated a life of quiet success and carefully guarded independence, a stark contrast to the role she had been assigned since childhood, the capable, overlooked older sister perpetually orbiting the fragile, demanding son that was her younger sibling, Chloe. The dynamic had been cemented the year Ellie turned 8. Chloe arrived 3 months premature, a tiny, terrifyingly vulnerable infant fighting for breath in a neonatal intensive care unit. Ellie remembered the frantic, late-night rush to the hospital, the hushed, anxious whispers, her father Robert's perpetually worried expression, her mother Patricia's transformation into a whirlwind of antiseptic wipes and whispered prayers. Aunt Carol had stayed with Ellie, offering distractions that couldn't quite pierce the thick blanket of anxiety that enveloped their lives. Chloe survived, thrived even, eventually growing into a physically robust child. But the narrative of her fragility, her inherent need for protection and unwavering attention, became permanently etched into the Vance family psyche, largely orchestrated by Pat. The house remained a quasi-hospital zone long after the oxygen tanks were gone. The sharp scent of disinfectant lingered. Ellie learned early that any sign of her own needs, a scraped knee, a stellar report card, even a simple childhood sniffle, was secondary, an inconvenience, or worse, a potential threat to Chloe's delicate equilibrium. "Eleanor, was that a cough?" Pat would ask sharply, her eyes instantly filled with alarm. Not for Ellie, but for the potential germ vector she represented. "We can't take any chances with Chloe's lungs. Pack a small bag, dear. You'll stay with Aunt Carol for a few days until we're sure you're clear." These banishments to her aunt's or grandmother's house, initially novel, soon became painful symbols of her secondary status. To compensate, to earn the parental approval that flowed so effortlessly towards Chloe, Ellie became relentlessly competent. She excelled academically, burying herself in books, winning spelling bees, then science fairs, then debate competitions. Each achievement, however, landed with a dull thud in the echo chamber of her parents' Chloe-centric world. She remembered vividly at age 12, bursting through the door, clutching the first-place trophy from the district science fair, her project on sustainable energy meticulously researched and presented. "Mom! Dad! Look! I won!" Pat glanced up briefly from sterilizing Chloe's water bottle, offering a distracted smile. "That's nice, dear. Did you remember to wash your hands thoroughly when you came in? Chloe felt a little warm this afternoon." Robert mumbled a noncommittal, "Good job, Ellie," before turning back to help Chloe arrange her dolls, just so. The heavy glass trophy suddenly felt cheap and insignificant in Ellie's hands. As they grew older, Chloe, keenly intelligent in her own way, learned to weaponize the family narrative. The feigned headache before Ellie's piano recital, which Pat and Robert then skipped to stay home with Chloe. The sudden tears over a lost favorite homework pen minutes before Ellie's crucial scholarship interview meeting with her guidance counselor, again causing her parents to rush home, abandoning Ellie at school. The dramatic pronouncements of feeling overwhelmed or excluded whenever attention shifted, even momentarily, away from her. Pat and Robert, trapped in their cycle of guilt and ingrained protectiveness, always rushed to soothe, to compensate, to prioritize Chloe's perceived needs above all else. High school was a blur of Ellie diligently building her escape route. She maintained a near-perfect GPA, loaded up on AP courses, chaired the debate team, volunteered, anything to bolster her college applications, specifically targeting full academic scholarships. She knew instinctively that relying on her parents financially for higher education was a non-starter. Any available funds, any potential loans, would inevitably be earmarked for Chloe's future, regardless of merit. The day Ellie received her acceptance letter to UT Austin, accompanied by a full presidential scholarship covering tuition, room, and board, should have been a moment of unadulterated triumph. She clutched the thick envelope, reading the words over and over, tears of relief blurring the print. She had done it. She was getting out, entirely on her own steam. She practically floated through the front door that evening, ready to share her incredible news. Robert was reading the paper, Pat was on the phone, likely coordinating one of Chloe's many social activities, and Chloe, then a high school freshman, was sprawled on the living room floor, moodily sketching in a notebook. "I got in," Ellie announced, unable to contain her excitement. "UT Austin, and I got the presidential scholarship. It covers everything." Robert lowered his paper slightly. "UT? Decent engineering school, I suppose." Pat waved vaguely from the phone. Chloe didn't even look up. "Cool," she muttered distractedly. Then after a beat she added without glancing up from her sketch pad, "Does that mean you'll be moving out soon? Because I'm totally turning your room into a proper gaming setup. I need space for dual monitors, maybe a streaming rig." The casual, self-absorbed remark, the complete lack of acknowledgement of Ellie's monumental achievement, landed like a physical blow. In that moment, any lingering hope Ellie harbored that her accomplishments might finally earn her equal standing shattered completely. She wasn't just the overlooked daughter, she was an inconvenience whose departure was anticipated primarily for the space she would vacate. From that day forward, Ellie started counting the days until she could leave for Austin. She smiled politely through the remainder of high school, endured the family dinners dominated by Chloe's latest manufactured crisis or social triumph, and poured every ounce of her energy into preparing for her escape. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that true independence, true validation, would have to be built far away from the suffocating shadow of her family's ingrained favoritism. The need for secrecy, for building a life entirely separate from their knowledge and judgment, began to take root long before she ever made her first dollar in the stock market. It was born in the years of being made to feel invisible. Escaping to the sprawling campus of the University of Texas at Austin felt like stepping into a different dimension. For the first time in her life, Ellie Vance wasn't primarily Chloe's older sister. She was just Ellie, a bright, focused student armed with a full academic scholarship she had earned through sheer willpower and academic grit. She threw herself into her studies, initially leaning towards economics, then finding her stride in marketing and business analytics, reveling in the intellectual challenge and the blessed anonymity. She made genuine friends, people drawn to her quiet intelligence and dry wit, utterly unaware of the complicated family dynamics she'd left behind in whichever unspecified Texas suburb her parents resided. Contact with home was minimal, carefully managed. She endured Pat's weekly calls, offering brief, vague updates on her classes, while expertly deflecting intrusive questions or guilt-laden sighs about Chloe's latest high school drama. Visits home were rare, always buffered by the excuse of exams, projects, or non-existent campus jobs. The physical distance created a necessary emotional buffer, allowing Ellie the space to finally discover who she was outside the suffocating role her family had assigned her. Graduating with honors felt like a personal vindication, but the real triumph was landing a coveted project manager position at a rapidly scaling tech startup in Austin's burgeoning downtown scene. Her first real paycheck, her first modestly furnished but entirely hers rental apartment, the simple act of paying her own bills without reference to family obligation. These were the markers of the true independence she craved. She worked hard, quickly gaining respect for her sharp, analytical skills and calm under pressure, finally feeling valued for her competence, not just tolerated as an appendage to her sister. Life was still lean. Austin wasn't cheap, and her salary, while good for a recent grad, was far from extravagant, but it was hers. The turning point came unexpectedly. While researching emerging market trends for a client presentation at work, Ellie stumbled down an internet rabbit hole that led her to online investing forums, and eventually to a highly rated online course taught by a man named David Chen. Chen, a former quant analyst, had a knack for demystifying complex financial concepts, focusing on data-driven analysis, value investing principles, and disciplined risk management. Initially wary of anything resembling a get-rich-quick scheme, Ellie found Chen's rigorous, analytical approach deeply appealing, resonating with her own strengths. On impulse, using money carefully saved from her paychecks, she paid the modest course fee. Investing became her new obsession, pursued with the same quiet intensity she had once devoted to winning scholarships. Nights and weekends were no longer for unwinding, but for devouring financial news, dissecting quarterly earnings reports, learning technical charting, studying market psychology, and mastering risk management strategies. She treated it like the most demanding graduate seminar, applying her analytical mind to the complex puzzle of the markets. She started small, paper trading first, then investing a few $100s of her own savings into well-researched stocks. Her first tangible success, turning a $375 investment in an overlooked regional tech supplier into nearly $1,500 in 3 months based on her analysis of their supply chain efficiency, was exhilarating. The intellectual satisfaction of being proven right was almost as potent as the monetary gain. She followed it with a calculated bet on a small biotech firm awaiting Phase 2 trial results. When the results were positive, her initial $1,000 investment tripled. She didn't cash out immediately. She reinvested everything, compounding her gains, meticulously tracking her performance, learning from small losses, refining her strategies. As her knowledge deepened and her capital base grew, albeit slowly at first, she began taking larger, more confident positions. She developed a particular affinity for identifying disruptive technologies just before they hit the mainstream radar. AI applications, specialized biotech niches, renewable energy components. She learned the careful calculus of options trading to leverage her gains, always prioritizing capital preservation through strict stop losses and diversification. Her portfolio, started with literal pocket money, began to quietly, steadily swell. The breakthrough arrived during a period of intense market volatility combined with rapid advancements in artificial intelligence research. Ellie, having spent months doing deep dives into several obscure AI software companies focusing on niche industrial applications, had concentrated a significant portion of her now substantial portfolio into 2 specific stocks she believed were deeply undervalued. One morning, checking her secure investment app before heading to her marketing job, she saw it. News had broken overnight about a massive strategic partnership one of her chosen companies had secured. Its stock price hadn't just risen, it had exploded, multiplying tenfold. The impact cascaded through her portfolio. She ran the numbers, checked them twice, then a third time on a different platform, her heart pounding against her ribs. It wasn't a mistake. The single overnight surge, combined with her other well-performing investments, had propelled her net worth across the 7-figure threshold, then rapidly past $2 million and then $5 million, settling somewhere north of $10 million by the time the market opened fully. She stared at the screen, stunned into silence, the sheer magnitude of the number difficult to process. It was life-altering wealth, achieved entirely through her own intellect, discipline, and calculated risk-taking in the secrecy of her off hours. Later that day, sitting in a pointless marketing meeting discussing campaign metrics that suddenly felt utterly trivial, the absurdity struck her with full force. She was making more money passively through her investments before breakfast than her annual salary provided. This job, once the proud symbol of her hard-won independence, now felt like a constraint, a performance she no longer needed to maintain. During her lunch break, sitting alone at her desk, she calmly drafted her resignation letter, giving standard 2 weeks' notice but making her departure effective immediately in her mind. The feeling wasn't just relief, it was profound, unadulterated liberation. Almost simultaneous with the exhilaration, however, came the cold, pragmatic realization. Her family could never know. Not yet, perhaps not ever. She instantly pictured Pat's reaction. Not pride, but a calculation of how much Ellie now owed to them, how this wealth could solve all of Chloe's problems. She pictured Robert's potential jealousy or clumsy attempts to manage her money for her. She pictured Chloe's instant assumption that Ellie's success existed solely to facilitate her own desired lifestyle. The potential for drama, entitlement, manipulation, and the inevitable diminishment of her achievement was too high, too certain. The secrecy, initially born from the hurts of her childhood, now transformed into a necessary shield to protect her newfound financial sovereignty. Her cover story needed a slight adjustment. She wasn't job hunting. She told her parents she left the startup grind for more flexible, independent consulting and freelance project management work from home, keeping her income deliberately vague while providing a plausible reason for leaving her stable job. The wall of secrecy around her true financial status remained firmly in place, higher and thicker than ever. Several years slipped by. Ellie, now in her early 30s, operated Phoenix Capital with quiet, astonishing success from her Austin base. Her portfolio had weathered market fluctuations, growing exponentially thanks to her disciplined strategies and knack for identifying undervalued potential. She lived comfortably, enjoying the anonymity her wealth afforded, her public persona still carefully maintained as that of Ellie Vance, independent marketing consultant, working remotely on vaguely defined projects, plausible deniability for her flexible schedule and comfortable, though not extravagant, lifestyle visible to her family. Meanwhile, back in Texas, the financial situation for Robert and Pat Vance had demonstrably worsened. Robert had faced a series of professional setbacks, perhaps layoffs at his insurance firm due to industry consolidation, or a string of poor real estate deals that soured. Pat's calls to Ellie, once infrequent and superficial, became more regular, tinged with a growing undercurrent of anxiety. There were complaints about the rising cost of property taxes on their modest suburban home, hints about unexpected medical bills, always minor ailments described with dramatic flair, and sighs about the general difficulty of making ends meet on Robert's now unreliable income. The subtle hints eventually coalesced into a direct plea. "Ellie, honey," Pat began one evening, her voice laced with practiced vulnerability. "Things are just so incredibly tight right now. Your father's beside himself with worry, not sleeping well. We hate to ask this of you, knowing you work so hard. But just a little help each month? Maybe 1,000? Just until Robert's commission structure stabilizes again? It would take such a weight off." Ellie listened, her stomach twisting with familiar conflict. Intellectually, she knew she owed them nothing. Their current struggles were the result of their own choices, including enabling Chloe's financial irresponsibility years prior, which depleted their savings. Emotionally, however, the ingrained guilt and the specter of family obligation were harder to dismiss entirely. She remembered the years of feeling invisible. Yes, but also the basic fact that they were her parents. Could she truly let them struggle significantly while she sat on millions? After days of internal debate, weighing past hurts against present realities, she relented, but with strict parameters in her own mind. This was help for them, for basic living expenses, not a slush fund for Chloe. And it had to seem plausible coming from her consultant income. She agreed to set up an automatic monthly transfer of $1,000. Pat's reaction was effusively grateful, bordering on tearful. "Oh, Ellie, you're a lifesaver. An absolute angel. I don't know what we would have done. This will help cover the mortgage and utilities wonderfully." For a few months, an uneasy equilibrium held. The $1,000 arrived in their account punctually on the first of each month. Pat's calls remained frequent, but the desperate edge lessened slightly. Then inevitably the normalization began. The $1,000 wasn't treated as extraordinary help, but as expected income. Subtle hints about needing more started cropping up. The car needing expensive repairs, the roof potentially needing work soon. The true nature of the situation, however, was laid bare during one of Ellie's rare obligatory weekend visits home. She had driven down from Austin, steeling herself for the usual dynamic. Arriving slightly earlier than expected, she let herself in the back door and paused in the hallway, hearing Pat's animated voice coming from the kitchen. Pat was on the phone, clearly talking to Aunt Carol, her voice lowered conspiratorially, but still carrying. "Yes, Ellie sends 1,000 now, which is a godsend for the mortgage since Robert's commissions have been so spotty," Pat was saying. "But honestly, Carol, poor Chloe feels so terribly left out. All her friends from Carlton carry those Gucci bags they go on weekend trips. It just breaks my heart seeing her feel inadequate." A pause. "So, Robert and I decided... Well, I decided and he agreed. Naturally, we have to skim at least $400, maybe $500 off Ellie's money each month for Chloe. Just discreetly, you know? A little extra for clothes, maybe help with her car payment so she can keep up appearances. Ellie will never notice where the 1,000 actually goes. She thinks it's all for boring bills anyway. Chloe deserves something nice after all of her struggles." Ellie stood frozen in the hallway, the blood draining from her face, then rushing back with a sickening heat. Skim. Ellie will never notice. Chloe deserves something nice. The casual deceit, the calculated diversion of funds meant to help them stay afloat, directed instead towards perpetuating the very entitlement that caused their financial problems in the first place. It was a betrayal far deeper than simple ingratitude. It confirmed every cynical suspicion Ellie had harbored. Her help wasn't valued. It was simply another resource to be exploited for Chloe's benefit. She retreated silently, backing out the door before they knew she was there, driving back to Austin that same day with a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Any lingering warmth, any residual sense of familial obligation she might have felt was extinguished completely. She didn't confront them. She didn't change the automatic payment. Not yet. But the emotional attachment was now absolute, the final connection severed internally, replaced by a chilling resolve. Months later, the other shoe dropped. Pat called again, her voice thick with carefully orchestrated anxiety. "Ellie, darling, I have some difficult news. It's about Chloe's student loans from Carlton. The grace period just ended. And oh, honey, the monthly payments. They're just astronomical. We had no idea they'd be this high." Ellie remained silent, waiting. "We're losing sleep over it," Robert paces the floor every night. It's crushing poor Chloe. She can barely focus on her job hunt knowing this mountain of debt is looming. Pat laid the guilt on thick. We hate to ask, Ellie, especially with you already being so generous. But is there any possible way? Just temporarily, of course. You could maybe increase the monthly help? Significantly? The loan payment alone is over $2,000. If you could maybe make it, say, $3,500 total each month, just until Chloe lands that great job we know she's capable of, it would be an absolute godsend. Take such a terrible weight off all our shoulders. Ellie listened, her face impassive, her mind cold and analytical. She knew exactly where that extra money was really intended to go. Some to the loans, perhaps, but undoubtedly a hefty portion to further subsidize on Chloe's lifestyle under the guise of necessity. Part of her wanted to unleash years of fury, to tell Pat exactly what she'd overheard months ago. But another colder, more strategic part took over. A direct refusal now would lead to immediate conflict, accusations, possibly make them suspicious about her own finances if she claimed she couldn't afford it. Agreeing, however, reluctantly, maintained her cover, kept the peace for now, and perhaps provided one final, irrefutable piece of data demonstrating their insatiable entitlement. It was more rope. "All right, Mom," Ellie said, her voice carefully neutral, betraying nothing of the ice in her veins. "It will be tight, but I can adjust the transfer to $3,500 starting next month. But please understand, this has to be temporary, specifically for these loan payments." Pat practically wept with relief, barely registering the temporary caveat. "Oh, Ellie, thank you, thank you. You truly are an angel. This changes everything. Now Chloe can maybe finally get some decent outfits for her interviews, too, and perhaps that new laptop she needs to apply properly." Ellie ended the call feeling numb but resolute. The obligation trap had tightened its coils, fueled by their deception. But with each turn of the screw, her own determination to eventually break free completely and irrevocably grew stronger. The upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, she suspected, might just provide the perfect opportunity. While Ellie navigated the complex world of high finance from the serene, sunlit office of her Austin condo, executing trades worth more than her parents' house, analyzing global market trends, quietly growing her multi-million-dollar fortune, Chloe Vance's post-graduation reality looked starkly different. Armed with an expensive communications degree from Carleton University, Chloe had returned home to her parents' suburban house, her job search proving frustratingly slow. The entry-level marketing positions she felt were beneath. Her Carleton education weren't materializing into offers, and the more prestigious roles she coveted required experience she didn't have. She spent her days scrolling through job boards with performative sighs, complaining loudly about the unfairness of the market, and subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, hinting about needing funds for networking outfits, application fees, or simply keeping up appearances with her still employed Carleton friends. Pat and Robert, fueled by Ellie's monthly $3,500 contribution, a significant portion of which they funneled directly to Chloe, readily indulged her, ensuring their poor, struggling graduate never felt deprived, further cementing Chloe's sense of entitlement and delaying any real impetus for her to face financial independence. Ellie observed this dynamic from afar during brief, obligatory phone calls, her silence masking a growing disgust. As November rolled around, Pat initiated the Thanksgiving plans with her usual flurry of calls. "Ellie, dear, Thanksgiving at our place this year, naturally. Aunt Carol and the cousins are coming, should be about the 20 of us. We'll expect you around noon on Thursday." It was presented as an immutable fact, not an invitation. Ellie, knowing a refusal would cause more drama than attendance, gave her standard non-committal agreement. A week before the holiday, the anticipated manipulation arrived via another phone call from Pat, her voice laced with theatrical strain. "Ellie, it's a disaster. I threw my back out, lifting Chloe's laundry basket, wouldn't you know? Heavy sweaters." Ellie could practically hear the forced wince. "The doctor says I absolutely cannot be standing and cooking for hours. I simply cannot manage Thanksgiving for 20 people. I don't know what we're going to do." Ellie recognized the performance instantly, but also saw an opportunity, a way to control one aspect of the inevitable family gathering. "Oh no, Mom, that sounds awful," she replied, injecting practiced concern into her voice. "Please don't worry about the food at all. Seriously. Why don't you relax and let me handle everything? I can arrange for the entire meal to be catered from that wonderful place downtown, Austin Harvest. They do incredible Thanksgiving spreads. Everything, turkey, ham, all the sides, pies. It'll be completely stress-free for you and Dad. Pat's relief was instantaneous and effusive, and the back pain miraculously forgotten. Oh, Ellie, would you? You're an absolute angel, a lifesaver. That would be perfect. What a wonderful daughter you are. Just make sure, she added quickly, that they include that sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows that Chloe loves so much. Consider it done, Mom, Ellie said, ending the call with a sigh. She immediately made the arrangements with the caterer, ordering a lavish, top-of-the-line feast far exceeding anything her mother would have prepared. Another subtle irony only she would appreciate. As she finalized the catering order, Ellie considered the logistics of the day. Thanksgiving Thursday. Due to the time difference, the crucial Asian stock markets would be opening and highly active precisely during the late afternoon and evening hours when the family dinner would be in full swing. She had several significant time-sensitive positions in tech and biotech sectors there that required close monitoring. Automated stop losses weren't sufficient for this level of volatility. Missing critical buy or sell points could cost her potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Bringing her work laptop was not a choice. It was a professional necessity. She'd find a quiet corner, perhaps her old bedroom, check in periodically, manage her portfolio discreetly. Her family, believing her to be a freelance consultant, wouldn't find it particularly unusual for her to need to check emails or handle client work occasionally, even on a holiday. As she packed her overnight bag later that week, she tucked the sleek, powerful laptop inside. Then on impulse, feeling a strange premonition that this Thanksgiving might finally be the breaking point, she printed a concise, one-page summary of her primary investment portfolio's current holdings and net value. She folded it neatly and slipped it into an inner pocket of her laptop bag. Just in case their entitlement, their blindness, their casual dismissal finally pushed her too far. She felt a knot of combined dread and anticipation tighten within her as she prepared for the obligatory pilgrimage back into the heart of the Vance family dynamic. Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and clear over Austin. Ellie drove to her parents' suburban home, the back seat laden with professionally packaged aromatic containers from one of the city's finest caterers. The house, when she arrived, was already bustling with the low-level chaos of a family gathering, Aunt Carol arranging a centerpiece, cousins milling about, the ubiquitous scent of Pat's overly sweet holiday potpourri clashing slightly with the savory promise emanating from the catering boxes Ellie began unloading. Dinner commenced, the table groaning under the weight of the lavish spread Ellie had provided. The turkey was perfectly roasted, the sides were gourmet, a far cry from Pat's usually dry and overcooked offerings. There were murmurs of appreciation around the table, directed nominally at Ellie for arranging it. Pat, presiding from her seat, her bad back seemingly forgotten now that she wasn't cooking, beamed, playing the role of the gracious hostess whose thoughtful daughter had saved the day. Honestly, Pat declared loudly to the assembled relatives, I don't know what I would have done. My back was just killing me. But our Ellie, she gestured magnanimously towards her older daughter, stepped right in and handled everything. Isn't she wonderful? Aunt Carol smiled warmly. It looks absolutely divine, Ellie. Very generous indeed. Ellie offered a polite, non-committal smile focusing on her plate. As always, the conversation inexorably drifted towards Chloe. Chloe, seated opposite Ellie, picked listlessly at the artisanal cornbread stuffing, managing to project an air of weary dissatisfaction despite the feast laid before her. It's just so hard seeing Chloe struggle to find the right position, Carol, Pat confided, her voice dropping into a tone of performative concern. That Carleton degree is exceptional, of course, but these companies, they don't appreciate true potential. And honestly, she sighed dramatically, how can she present herself properly for those high-level interviews without the right resources? The competition is fierce. Robert cleared his throat, nodding gravely. We're doing everything we can, naturally, but things are tight. He then turned his attention directly to Ellie, his expression shifting to one of paternal expectation. Ellie, honey, your mother and I were discussing. Now that you have that steady consulting income, very stable from what we hear, and with Chloe trying so hard to launch her career properly, perhaps you could see your way clear to helping her out just a little bit more directly, just for a few months to get her established? Pat jumped back in seamlessly. Yes, darling. Maybe enough for a down payment on a decent, reliable used car. It would make such a difference for her getting to interviews all over town. Or perhaps help with the deposit on a nice little apartment in a good neighborhood. First impressions are everything, you know. Robert nodded again. It's important for her future, Ellie. You're doing well. It's only right you help your sister get started. Ellie slowly placed her fork down beside her plate. The clink of silver against ceramic seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden pause she created. Years of swallowed resentment, of quiet observation, of being the dependable, invisible support system while Chloe's every whim was prioritized. It all coalesced in this moment. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of them asking for more money for Chloe, justifying it with Ellie's imagined stable income, right after accepting the expensive meal she provided, it was the final straw. The dam of her carefully maintained composure didn't break with rage. It dissolved into an unnerving, icy calm. Actually, Mom, Dad, Ellie began, her voice quiet but perfectly clear, cutting through the low hum of table conversation. Every eye turned towards her. My financial situation has undergone some significant changes recently. Helping Chloe with a car or an apartment deposit isn't really feasible right now. My own plans require substantial capital allocation. Chloe snorted audibly from across the table. What plans, Ellie? Finally saving up for a non-rental couch? Pat frowned, waving a dismissive hand. Don't be silly, dear. What could possibly be more important than helping your sister build her future? Robert added, his tone bordering on suspicious. You're consulting. Must be doing even better than we realized if you have substantial capital needs all of a sudden. Ellie met their skeptical, condescending gazes one by one. Well, she said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her water, my consulting work, as you call it, actually concluded several years ago. She let that sink in for a moment as confusion flickered across their faces. Since then, I've been focusing primarily on personal investments. Investing? Robert scoffed. Investing what, Ellie? The spare change from your grocery budget? Charlie and William, if present or other cousins, might have chuckled. Ellie ignored the jibe. This was the moment she had subconsciously or perhaps consciously prepared for. She reached calmly into the sleek laptop bag resting beside her chair, not for the laptop itself, but for the single folded sheet of paper tucked inside. She unfolded it deliberately, smoothing it out beside her plate. Perhaps this will clarify my current financial situation, she stated, her voice utterly devoid of inflection. She turned the paper slightly so the heading and the bottom line figure were visible to those closest. This is a summary statement from my primary investment portfolio. As of market close yesterday, she paused, letting her eyes sweep across their now intensely focused faces. The net asset value was approximately $10.4 million. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence descended upon the Thanksgiving table. Aunt Carol's fork clattered onto her plate. The cousins froze mid-chew. Chloe stared at the paper, then at Ellie, her face completely draining of color, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Pat's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with utter disbelief. Robert leaned forward sharply, squinting at the number, his face turning a mottled red as comprehension warred with raw and naked avarice. Then came the explosion. It wasn't pride. It wasn't congratulations. It was Pat, finding her voice first in a high-pitched, incredulous shriek that made everyone jump. $10.4 million? You've been sitting on $10 million? Her face contorted with sudden, explosive rage. And all this time, you only sent us that pathetic $3,500 a month? While we scrimped and saved? While your sister desperately needed help? How dare you, Eleanor? How could you be so unbelievably greedy, so selfish? Robert slammed his fist onto the table, making the remaining cranberry sauce jump. We raised you better than this, he roared, his voice thick with fury and entitlement. Hiding millions while your own family struggles? Letting us worry sick about bills, about Chloe's loans? What kind of daughter are you? Ellie remained seated, a strange calm enveloping her as their accusations rained down. The sheer predictable hypocrisy of it all was almost validating. When they finally paused, sputtering for breath, she finally spoke, her voice dangerously quiet again. Struggled? She repeated, her gaze locking onto her parents. You struggled because you poured every available resource, including money meant for your retirement and funds I sent for you into Chloe's expensive education, enabling her lifestyle for years. Selfish? A short, humorless laugh escaped her. That's rich, Mom, especially since I distinctly remember overhearing you and Dad cheerfully planning how to skim money off my initial support payments, specifically to buy Chloe designer goods last year, assuring each other I'd never notice. That direct hit landed. Pat and Robert exchanged fleeting, panicked glances. Ellie slowly stood up, pushing her chair back deliberately. You want to talk about duty? About family support? Her voice gained strength, cutting through their sputtering defenses. Where was your duty to me when my science fair trophies were shoved in a closet? When you skipped my debate championships because Chloe didn't feel well? When my full scholarship was met with indifference and plans to take over my bedroom? She looked directly at Chloe, who flinched and looked away, tears now streaming down her face. Tears of humiliation and thwarted desire, not remorse. Where was your gratitude for the tens of thousands of dollars I sent over the years? Money I earned through relentless work and smart investing while you... She gestured briefly towards Chloe. Complained about needing new outfits for parties? She picked up her purse and laptop bag. You made your priorities clear my entire life. It was always Chloe first. Chloe's needs, Chloe's feelings, Chloe's potential. I was just the reliable backup, the invisible support system. She looked at her stunned, furious parents, then at her weeping sister. Well, consider the backup system permanently offline. My money is mine. Every single cent earned despite your constant dismissal and lack of faith. She turned towards the front door, ignoring Aunt Carol's tentative, Ellie, dear, perhaps. You want support? Ellie called back over her shoulder, pausing at the doorway. Looks like Chloe's expensive Carleton education and bright future will finally have to provide it. She stepped out to the cool evening air, pulling the door firmly shut behind her, leaving the remnants of the lavish meal she had paid for growing cold amidst the incandescent wreckage of her family's entitlement and greed. Driving away from her parents' house that Thanksgiving evening, Ellie felt a strange mix of volatile emotions. The lingering adrenaline of the confrontation, the cold clarity of finally speaking her truth, and a profound, weary sadness. Her phone, placed face down on the passenger seat, began buzzing almost immediately, the screen lighting up with calls she knew would be filled with either rage or manipulative tears. She ignored it, focusing on the highway stretching back towards Austin, towards her own life, leaving the wreckage of the family dinner behind her both literally and figuratively. Back in the quiet sanctuary of her condo later that night, she allowed herself a brief, clinical assessment of the digital onslaught. Dozens of missed calls from Pat, Robert, and Chloe. Text messages that ranged from furious accusations, "How dare you humiliate us?" to bewildered demands, "You owe us an explanation and money," to pathetic attempts at guilt. "Your mother is heartbroken. You've destroyed this family." There was no hint of introspection, no glimmer of understanding, only raw entitlement and wounded pride. Reasoning with them, Ellie realized with absolute finality, was pointless. Their reality was built on a foundation of denial she could no longer participate in maintaining. She deleted the entire call log and message thread without replying. The relative quiet, however, lasted only a few days. Alerted by a concerned text from Aunt Carol. "Ellie, honey, I think you should see what Pat's posting." Ellie ventured onto Facebook, a platform she rarely used. What she found made her stomach churn. Pat had launched a full-blown social media smear campaign. There were tearful, vague booking statuses about family heartbreak and children who forget where they came from. These quickly escalated into more direct, heavily distorted posts painting Ellie as a cold, materialistic, ungrateful daughter who had achieved sudden, unexplained wealth, conveniently omitting the years of investing, and cruelly abandoned her loving, struggling family and sensitive younger sister in their time of need. Pat masterfully played the victim, weaving a narrative designed to elicit sympathy and paint Ellie as the villain. The comment section became a cesspool of judgment from distant relatives, old neighbors, and casual acquaintances who only knew the carefully curated Vance family facade. Shameful! Money really does change people for the worse. I always thought she seemed a bit cold. Family should always come first, no matter what. Pat diligently replied to supportive comments with crying emojis and affirmations of her heartbreak, fanning the flames of public condemnation against her own daughter. The sheer, calculated malice of it, the willingness to destroy Ellie's reputation to salvage her own ego, and perhaps garner sympathy or financial aid from others, was the final, irrefutable proof Ellie needed. Calmly, methodically, Ellie logged into her online banking portal. She navigated to the recurring payment section, found the $3,500 monthly transfer scheduled to go to Robert and Patricia Vance. She clicked Edit, then selected Cancel Recurring Payment. Confirmed. Done. Then she composed one last stark email addressed to both her parents. Subject: Final communication. Due to the ongoing hostility, deliberate public misrepresentations of our private family matters, and a fundamental lack of respect for boundaries, all financial support provided by me is terminated, effective immediately. Any further attempts by any of you, Pat, Robert, or Chloe, to contact me through any channel will be ignored. Consider this my final communication on the matter. She hit send, then immediately created email filters to route any replies from their known addresses directly to the trash, unread. The financial cord, the last tangible link binding her to their toxic dynamic, was severed. Predictably, the cessation of funds triggered a new, more frantic wave of calls and texts. They tried calling from unknown numbers Ellie didn't recognize but suspected belonged to cousins or neighbors pressed into service by Pat. She didn't answer, simply researched the unfamiliar numbers online when possible, confirmed their likely origin, and added them to her ever-growing block list. She blocked Pat, Robert, and Chloe on the few remaining social media platforms where connections lingered. She built her digital fortress wall by digital brick. The final, desperate act came about a week later. Late on a Friday afternoon, Ellie received an alert call from Mike, the ever-vigilant manager of her condo building's front desk. "Miss Vance," Mike said, his voice professionally calm but with an undercurrent of alertness. "Apologies for the disturbance, but there are 3 individuals currently in the lobby, a Robert, Patricia, and Chloe Vance, who are rather forcefully demanding to see you. They state it's an urgent family matter." Ellie's heart gave a lurch, but she kept her voice steady. "Thank you for letting me know, Mike. Please reiterate that I'm not accepting any unexpected visitors, and they are not on my approved guest list." "I have done so, Ms. Vance," Mike replied. "Several times. They are insistent. Mr. Vance mentioned something about calling the police if they weren't allowed up." "If they persist or cause any further disturbance, Mike," Ellie instructed firmly, "please do not hesitate to call building security or the Austin PD yourself regarding trespassing and harassment. Under no circumstances are they to be allowed access." "Understood completely, Ms. Vance," Mike confirmed. "Actually, it appears they are leaving now, after I reiterated the building's policy and mentioned security would be involved momentarily. They seemed quite displeased." Ellie thanked Mike again, ending the call with trembling hands. They had actually shown up, driven hours to Austin to try and physically confront her, to bully their way back into her life, back into her finances. The audacity was staggering, but also clarifying. Blocking numbers and relying on building security wasn't a sustainable solution for true peace. They wouldn't stop. They wouldn't respect her boundaries as long as they knew where to find her. That night, curled up on her sofa, the glittering Austin skyline outside suddenly feeling less like a symbol of freedom and more like a known location on their map, Ellie made her final decision. True sanctuary required more than just digital walls or helpful concierges. It required distance, untraceable distance. She opened her laptop not to check her portfolio, but to browse real estate listings. Not in Texas. Not anywhere her family had connections. She scrolled through properties in coastal Oregon, wooded Vermont, maybe even a quiet corner of Maine, places known for privacy, natural beauty, and a distinct lack of Vances or Sterlings or Millers, places where she could build a life entirely on her own terms, truly anonymous if she chose, finally free from the long shadow of her family's dysfunction. As she looked at photos of misty coastlines and tranquil forests, a profound sense of relief washed over her, stronger than any lingering sadness or anger. This wasn't running away. This was the final, necessary act of self-preservation. This was Ellie Vance choosing her own peace, finally and irrevocably. The search for a new home, a true sanctuary, had begun.